But one of my friends said he came here, he saw you drunk, and he kicked you, and he left. And
was he kicking you like wake you up, or like
he was kicking me to wake me up? And
not okay, by the way.
not okay.
Still.
But still, and when I woke up the next morning, I was like, oh yeah, I gotta call him so he can pick me up. And she's like, why? Like, you know what he did? I was like, yeah, but he's really good in other ways,
Oh, but you got the abuse going.
It was already going, and that conditioning was already happening. And then and this was before I had my daughter with him. So we had a kid together. And at that point I was like, well, we have a kid together, and like maybe all of this is happening, right? Like growing up Christian, it's like, okay, maybe we're like having stuff out of wedlock, so maybe we should get married. And then maybe, like
and
Jonah
it'll be all better. We'll get married, it'll be all better.
Right.
Yeah.
And no, it just got worse. And as I was going through that relationship and I kept getting more isolated and more isolated, I was like, I don't know how to get myself out. And I felt like I was so far away from, and even my family, he's like, why are you always calling your dad? Like, I'm here. Because I'm like, well, my dad's going to fix my stuff, right? That's what dads do. He's like, no, you don't need your dad anymore. You got me. And I was like, okay.
Hold on. Time out. It's like, you need your dad. I mean.
But I didn't. It's weird.
I mean, for someone else to say something like that is.
Right.
Red flag.
On the outside, you're like, what do you mean you don't need your dad?
Red
right?
Flag.
But there's that story where, the frog is boiling, right? And just, how do you boil a frog? You just slowly start turning up the heat. And before you know it, they're in boiling hot water, but they don't realize it because the temperature change was so gradual that they don't realize it.
Right.
And that's how I describe, being in a narcissistic abusive relationship to, my community online and like my clients that I've helped through this. I explain to them that what is happening it's not their fault. Like you would think, because there's people on the outside of the relationship, for me and for them too, of saying, you're dumb, you should leave him, like why aren't you leaving him? We can't see it,
right? I mean, they only see on the outside what's going on, but they don't see what happens behind closed doors. They don't see all the nice things the partner's doing.
Or right, because you only call friends, right? You're like, oh my gosh, it's to complain, right? And they're like, what? But I was like, well, he's really nice and he's really da-da-da-da, and he's my baby dad, right? So like, well, we should keep the family together. And I mean, if there's anything that I glean from this experience and what I tell a lot of the people that I come into contact with who are dealing with a similar situation is you have to think of your kids. You really have to think of your kids because they don't know any better, right? They're thinking that this is normal. Seeing the abusive patterns is normal, and when my son was growing up, I discovered that, he is very smart, but he had like learning, I don't want to call them learning disabilities, but he had issues retaining things.
Learning differences, I think is what they call it these days.
Yeah. It's not a disability, but yeah, he had some learning challenges, and I was like, what's happening? I couldn't understand it because I didn't understand the effects of trauma on the brain. Right.
Especially at a very young age.
At a very young age. Because we were together from when my son was 1.5 years, and so this is kind of all that he knows, right? At this point, like we left his dad when he was only 6 months old, and we came to Hawaii and all that stuff. And so he didn't really know his dad, eventually he did get to know him, but not at that point, once I figured out that his dad actually had ADHD, I didn't know, because I didn't know his dad very well, right? It was a military wedding, kind of a shotgun wedding.
Young kids.
You know, you don't talk about that stuff. And so I did know that his dad was a little, he was not as smart as I was, because he was copying off of my papers
during the exams
during class. Yeah, he wanted me to help him and study and stuff. But I knew it was part of that thing too, where he was like, okay, trying to get close to me and help him study. I was like, whatever.
It's actually a genius plan. I'm going to pretend I don't know the answers to this. I'm going to ask her for help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And